Alice in the UK. You're on with
Hello.
Jamie and Eric.
Hi, Alice.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Doing well.
I'm okay.
What would you like to talk about today?
I was listening to another show, which I've also forgotten the name of because I came across it at about 2 a.m. and people in the chat just told me, basically dared me to call in. So
Okay.
I heard you were interested in why people believe
Yes.
certain things. So for me, I've had like some experiences which I described as like spiritual experiences, good and bad, that would make me think there is something out there. And then there's a combination of evidence for like the Christian God based on the evidence of Jesus.
Okay. Well, so let's tackle this personally, right? Because there's no point in having the conversation, about things that you don't believe and things like that. So, what is it that really has you convinced? Maybe we can start with your best evidence and talk about it.
Well, it's just like it's not one specific thing. It's all of those things combined that. There's never like a 100% thing on one side or a 0% thing on the other. It's like a tipping scale type of thing.
Well,
and you either go, that's the way I see it.
But that's not actually true for the rest of the world, right? It's not. Well, maybe it's. I mean, there is an answer to things, right? Either there is this God that you're talking about, or there's not this God that you're talking about. It's not really up to me or you to determine whether or not it exists. It either does or doesn't, right? So let's investigate it a bit. You said that you've experienced spiritual things. What is spiritual?
Yeah.
That's kind of a muddy word that a lot of people use differently. So let's maybe start there and make sure that we can understand each other well.
Well, there's one experience which I have, which is kind of negative, but one where I was kind of rebelling a bit, and then I tried to summon some demons, and I actually had some it was like this big wall of hate came over me, and like these horror, I don't know how to describe it, but it wasn't like it was human, and it was like these things talking in my ear telling me not to be friends with these people, and I don't think most people would believe you saying that unless they'd experienced it themselves.
No, that's not true.
Yeah.
I've believed plenty of people have experienced some things. I mean, there are people who say that they hear voices all of the time. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're hearing voices. It might mean that there's something else going on. The question is, how do we determine one from the other, right? Because if you want to talk about likelihood, we can talk about how likely it is that somebody heard voices, which we have lots of evidence for, people thinking that they hear things and have different, either unexplained things or experience mental breaks that, contribute to that or might be under the influence of drugs, things like that, versus the idea of demons, which are something that we would need to show exist and how they get places and whether or not teleportation is a thing or if they're invisible or if hate is something that can be thrown at some, you know what I mean? Like there's a whole lot of that. How would you determine that you summoned a demon versus something that's likely a more naturalistic response, or more naturalistic reason?
I'd say because being completely sober, so it's not going to be down to drugs. So it's like the likelihood thing and the connection between the behavior at the time and what has actually happened. Mm-hmm. That's where it's connected.
Okay. Are you aware of something called priming?
No, I'm not.
Jamie, do you want to talk about priming, or do you want me to grab that?
No, because I have no idea where you're going with that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So priming is a kind of a psychological trick that we play on ourselves and each other, and it's really interesting. You find it in like horoscopes and things like that, where somebody says your lucky number is 17, and from there, you start looking for the number 17. And when you start looking for it, you find it everywhere. And the same is true for every number, right? Certain words or phrases, once you key in, you start to look for it. And then, oh my gosh, I saw it on a license plate. And I went here and the number was on the door and all this stuff. If you are setting yourself up to imagine that you're going to experience a certain thing, then the likelihood of you looking for, I'm sorry, Alice, there's a sound going on in the background. My ADD's jumping in.
So what he's saying is, if you have this idea that there are demons and that they can be summoned, and that there's such a thing as like a wall of hate under which you can be covered or overcome, that's going to influence how likely you are to believe a thing like that, right? So part of what Eric is touching on is called acquisition bias, which is when your mind is primed to look at a thing, you then take more note of it, right? Your mind and your senses observe, I think, I forget percentages, but more than 6 times what you actually note or think or observe, consciously. And so I think that's where he was going in terms of summoning a demon, etc. But at the present moment, I don't even know what you did to summon a demon, or how that worked out for you, or whether you've lived happily ever after with a demon, or what.
Or could we summon the demon?
Yeah, or could we? Hey, if that's a possibility, I don't get out to date a lot. Can I just summon a demon and see how this goes?
I've met some of your exes. You've done well, Jamie.
There are topics we don't talk about on the show, Eric.
Can we summon a demon right now, Alice?
I suppose you could try.
Okay.
But I wouldn't recommend it.
Well, so either it's going to happen or it's not, right?
Okay.
All right, what do we do?
Well, what did you do to summon a demon?
I had this book that showed me how to do it with some rituals and chants that you can say, and you call on certain things. But it's now gone, the book, so...
Okay. So, Alice, why did you summon a demon? Like, what were you...
I wasn't very happy, and I wanted to find a job with money.
I can sympathize. Yeah. I would also like a job with money. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I'm not sure which direction to go with this, particularly given the framework you set up.
Yeah. So where I'm going with this is we look for falsifiability in claims. We look to see if something is replicatable and what it would look like if it was true and what it would look like if it was false. To date, this has been tested and tested and tested and tested and tested and tested, and so far has not come out with conclusive, evidence that we have not yet been able to show, even to a reasonable degree at all, that anything happens when you do that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot to show to be able to get there. And that's always being weighed up against the other possible conclusions. And I would say that the conclusion that something naturalistic happened, we have evidence for. The conclusion that something supernatural happened, we have zero evidence for. And so I guess where we're sitting now with you calling in, Alice, would you expect that story to convince us?
Not unless you've experienced it yourself. That's what I mean.
Okay. Do you need to experience flying to the moon to know whether or not we put astronauts on the moon?
Well, that's a more common belief, I suppose. But lots of people deny that we ever got on the moon, didn't they?
Is that justified, though?
Well,
is the belief that human beings have walked on the moon justified? Is there sufficient evidence for that?
it's not a topic that I've really looked into, but it,
Okay.
I guess
So,
yeah,
so Alice,
with anything, it depends who you trust.
Alice, in the notes it says that you believe in God because of a personal experience. Do you believe that a God exists?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that God?
I can't tell you lots about, because it's inconceivable to the human mind, really.
Well, I mean, if it's a
Otherwise,
thing that you believe exists, presumably you conceive of it to some degree.
yeah, but only to a very, very limited amount.
Well, so the parts of it that are inconceivable, do you believe that those parts exist?
Yeah.
This is
So
this
how
is
can you
torture, not
believe
making a Princess Bride joke right now.
What?
It's inconceivable.
There's a movie
Sorry.
where inconceivable. And
It's not you. I do it to Jamie.
Okay.
I just can't.
Eric is razzing me on the side, but
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking.
yeah. So Alice, if you're talking about things that you believe that exist, but you're unable to describe any attributes of that thing.
Well, there's certain attributes like there's like the love and the sacrificial nature, but there's also like the war nature, and it's like
so these are attributes of God.
Yeah, but
or
you also
gods?
see of the one, and then.
Wait, so when you say that
the
there's a
evening.
warlike nature, what does that mean? Can you elaborate, please?
Like kind of like where it says not to bring peace but a sword and things like that.
Not that I've come to bring peace on earth. I've not come to bring peace but the sword. Yeah. So the Bible is part of the basis for your belief in a God.
Yeah.
Do you believe the rest of the Bible is true?
Well, it depends. Well, there's lots of it that's poetry.
How do you determine what's poetry and what's true? Like, how do you tell the difference?
Oh, what's poetry and what's literal?
Yeah.
Well, it's quite hard because so I rely on like people that are smarter than me most of the time. But I know that, well, like the obvious things like all the Psalms are poetry, and then there's books that are historical accounts like the Gospels, but they also contain lots of symbolism as well, and it's quite a hard thing to wrap your head around.
So what I would say is, I'm not a doctor. In order to determine whether or not a person is ill, I couldn't necessarily do it, so I rely on people that are more qualified. But if someone said, how does a doctor diagnose illness, I would say if they're trying to figure out if a bone is broken, they use an x-ray. If they're trying to figure out if you have a virus, they might check for symptoms, they might take your temperature, they might run blood tests. What kinds of things is it that people do to determine whether or not a passage in the Bible is literal or metaphorical?
I don't actually know the answer to that.
Right. So how do you determine, because people that spend their entire lives interpreting and providing answers about what parts of the Bible are true and which parts are literal and which parts are metaphorical, you have conflicting accounts from intelligent, studied people. How do you determine which person to listen to?
For that, I guess you have to determine what place they're coming from, and it is quite hard to try and there are lots of like opposing ideas. You have to see whether they're like coming from a place of love or whether they have like some big agenda, because like I wouldn't say all translations of the Bible were created equal, because you never know what agenda like King James had or something.
There's that. So here's what I will say. Here's one of the many things that I will say to clarify. there seems to be this inherent assumption in your last statement, which is that, well, okay, if the person, translating or interpreting has an agenda, you shouldn't use them reliably as a source. And you also said, if they're coming from a place of love, presumably that means they're a more reliable source as far as God's word is concerned. Is that correct? Just to clarify.
Well, not necessarily not use them, but
Okay.
compare them all together and see.
Okay. So let me throw this at you as well. The same thing happens in Islam, and the fate of entire countries and their laws flip on a dime based on that, right? And people do precisely that same process that you're describing to words that are held as sacred as you hold the ones that you hold sacred. Why should you use the Bible instead of the Quran, and the interpretation that you're using of biblical text instead of Quranic text?
Well, because if you go back to evidence of the resurrection of Jesus, the Quran says that Jesus didn't die.
What
evidence? But, well, hold on. So why shouldn't you believe that?
Because all the things line up. Have you ever watched The Case for Christ?
Yes.
The movie, no, but the book I have read.
Oh yeah.
I still demand that time back.
No, so Alice, I really want to
yeah, go ahead.
to get you on this, which is that there are two sacred texts and traditions here. Well, fields of tradition. I'm not going to try and pretend that all the Christians are the same, or that all the Muslims are the same, or their traditions are the same. But if there's a series of stories that says Jesus died and was resurrected, and that relates to God and God's actions on earth, and there's a series of stories that say that Jesus didn't die, that Jesus wasn't tortured to death, didn't resurrect, and that's related to God and God's actions on earth. What method would I use to determine which of those two things is more likely to be true, given that the people that practice these traditions fall down to you must have faith?
So faith comes in a bit, but you don't have to always have completely blind faith. So
that's good. So how do I see?
There are obviously I can't speak ancient Hebrew or ancient Greek, but there's other texts around that are from that time period.
Why would those other texts be authoritative?
Well,
I mean, in 1,000 years, if, I don't know, whatever political forces start world wars 3 and 4, and people are looking back at these ancient traditions and they're trying to figure out exactly how Harry Potterism was practiced and what the sacred texts were, they can go back and they can try and find the best manuscripts of the original text, and then, oh wait, the American version is slightly different than the British version, so you can have a schism, and they've found all of the fan fiction, and that just leads to a wild panoply of insanity. But if they're looking at that and someone said, well, why would you believe that any of the things in those stories was true, or that one text was more authoritative than the other? And someone said, oh, but look, you can find more texts written about this subject at the same time. It doesn't lend inherent credibility to the events described. I don't believe that Harry Potter exists or existed, because I don't have good reason to, and I don't know why I would believe that Jesus did either.
Do you think it's like a storybook?
Yeah.
I believe so, yeah.
Another example is Spider-Man, right?
Well,
Spider-Man takes place
Alice,
in New York.
I just mean, how does that strike you in terms of there are lots of stories written from a culture that passed on its history, from a time and a place where cultures passed on their history and their traditions, orally and told stories in order to edify each other and their children. So the fact that eventually those stories made it onto paper is not surprising to me, and the fact that those cultures and that paper was then grabbed and run with by religious organizations and teachings and traditions is also not surprising to me. But none of those things are persuasive to me in terms of Jesus' resurrection actually occurred or a miracle actually occurred. I can find stories of miracles that are much older than the Bible.
Right.
Yeah. Why would I believe this one?
Well, well, do you know about the amount of witnesses that there were?
Yeah, I know.
I know
we
that
know
the-
about.
The story
You
does.
believe-
The story does say 10,000 witnesses, but if I found an older text that said 20,000 witnesses, would you believe that that was more authoritative? Because again, that's part of the
It was
story.
written close to the
Well,
time.
and
Yeah.
also
Well,
let's
so,
let's
like,
let's
again,
also jump in
so-
here really quick.
No,
that
so again,
if
Alice,
a single
that
story
comes to the
says,
it comes to the same point, which is this is the thing that the story says. What evidence would you have to support it externally? And another detail in the story doesn't do that.
Well, externally,
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, well, so we've had you on the line for a while, and I more than anything want this to be a repeat call.
and I actually want to jump in before we
yeah.
finish. So,
So Alice, my sort of question was, I don't want to end the conversation here. I just want to also check that you're going to be able to call in again next week.
maybe.
Okay. Well, in any case, I think Eric wanted to talk to you as well.
yes, absolutely. I love the conversation. I love that we're talking about it. It's taking place at 25% the speed that I wish it was taking. But Jamie has amazing, very poignant, very thoughtful
What did you
points.
want to ask Alice?
What I wanted to ask Alice, you read that? Anyway, I'm caffeinated. So Alice, what I
Far
wanted to
too
say
caffeinated.
was, so let's say I have a book that says 10,000 people did something. Do you believe it because it says 10,000 people did something? Or do you actually have to see that 10,000 people did the thing, right? Saying that 1,000 people saw a thing is part of the claim. That's not the actual evidence backing it up. Do you get what I mean here?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, so if I say 500 people all saw a miracle and we all saw it together and we all wrote it down, then what you would expect to see is 500 written accounts by all of those people, right?
Okay.
We don't have that, though. We don't have the evidence of that. And so what you've done is you've kind of confused the claim for the evidence. And it's not that we're angry or anything like that. We're just looking for the evidence. But it looks like you've got a lot to go through. And I think that Jamie gave you a whole lot that you can kind of chew on and think about and call back on. Because it does matter whether or not something is true. It does matter whether or not, this belief is true, because it can influence every part of your life. And we want you to have the right tools and be a critical thinker, because it's going to help everywhere. It's going to help the way you raise, a family, or the way that you work. It's going to it's going to impact the way you're a neighbor and the way you interact in society. And that's important. We want you to have the best tools available. So hopefully you can go back over this and consider it and give us a call back and see what you think.
Okay.
All right. We weren't that bad, were we?
No.
Good.
I'm just a very slow thinker. I'm just really chilled.
That's okay. That's okay. We're going to get through it together, and hopefully this will help. Piece at a time.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right.